A very good evening to all pious yogis. This evening we shall discuss a discourse. This discourse known as Veda Vittaka Sutta, two kinds of the thoughts. The gist of this discourse is about two kinds of thoughts. So the gist of the teaching in this discourse say that whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of one's mind. So once the Buddha addressed the bhikkhus, telling the bhikkhus that before his enlightenment, before he attained enlightenment, he was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva. At that time, a thought occurred to him as a bodhisattva that he was thinking to divide his thoughts into two classes. And so he set on one side thoughts of sensual desire, kama vittaka, thoughts of ill will, vyapada vittaka, and thoughts of cruelty, vihimsa vittaka. And he set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, or nekkhamma vittaka, thoughts of non-ill will, abhyapada vittaka, and thoughts of non-cruelty, avihimsa vittaka. Thoughts of non-ill will is in fact thoughts of loving kindness, and thoughts of non-cruelty is indeed thoughts of compassion. So, as you know, Bodhisattva was struggling for 6 years in order to become Samma Sambuddha. So, in brief, one side is a wrong thoughts, the other side is a right thoughts. And then the Buddha explained further, as I abided task, diligent, ardent, and resolute. Here I use the thoughts of ill will as examples. A thought of ill will arose in me. That means arose at the time the mind bodhisattva. Then he understood thus this thoughts of ill will has arisen in me. This lead to my own affliction, to others' afflictions, and to the affliction of both. So these thoughts of ill will, vyapada vittaka, also obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, impediments, and leads away from nibbana. So at the time, as a bodhisattva, when he considered this lead to my own affliction, that thoughts of ill will, vyapada vittaka, subsided in him. So when he considered these thoughts of ill will, vyapada vittaka leads to others' affliction, then that thoughts of ill will subsided in him. When he considered this vyapada vittaka leads to the afflictions of both, or affliction means like cause pain, suffering, then these thoughts of ill will subsided in him. The Bodhisattva at that time considered this vyapada vittaka, thoughts of ill will, obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from nibbana, then that thought of ill will subsided in him. So whenever the thoughts of ill will arose in him, in the mind of Bodhisattva, he would abandon it, remove it, lead away with it. So similarly, we should be heedful to the teaching here. So any kinds of unwholesome thoughts not only lead to one's own afflictions, or to the affliction of others, or to the both, but it also obstructs wisdoms. It means becomes a hindrances to the development of wisdoms. So any kinds of unwholesome thoughts will lead one away from nibbana, That means instead of getting closer and closer to the attainment Nibbana, but the unwholesome thoughts will lead one far away from Nibbana. Then the Buddha said, whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of one's mind. So it's similar to those worldlings who like to curse in the mind. Eventually, the mental cursing becomes the habit of the mind or the habit of the thoughts. In other words, if one frequently thinks and ponders upon the thoughts of ill will, then one actually has abandoned the thoughts of non-ill will or thoughts of loving kindness and cultivate the thoughts of ill will. Then one's mind always inclines to thoughts of ill will. So you can understand from this teaching that how does a habit of the thoughts form in your mind. So we can change the bad habit of the mind or the habits of unwholesome thoughts. We can change the habitual unwholesome thoughts into habitual wholesome thoughts. Meditation is like directing your mind to the wholesome states. If one does not make an effort to direct the mind to the wholesome states, there is a tendency that the mind inclining towards unwholesome states. So one must realize the danger of unwholesome states. So here the Buddha explains with a simile. Just as in the last month of the rainy season, in the autumn, when the crops thickened, a cowherd would guard his cows by constantly tapping and poking them on this side or on that with a stick to check the cow, to curb the cows. If the cowherd is not careful or unmindful and let the cows stray into the crops, then the cowherd might be imprisoned, fined, or flogged. So the Buddha also said that as a bodhisattva, he saw in unwholesome states the danger, degradations, and defilements. But in wholesome states, he could see the blessing of renunciation, the aspect of cleansing. At the time, as a bodhisattva, when he abided thus diligent, ardent, and resolute, thoughts of non-ill will, in other words, thoughts of loving kindness arose. Then he understood these thoughts of non-ill will or thoughts of loving kindness as a reason. These thoughts of loving kindness does not lead to my own affliction or to others' affliction or to the affliction of both. And these thoughts of non-ill will, in other words, thoughts of loving kindness, also aids wisdom. Aid wisdom is helping the wisdom to arise and or to develop the wisdoms. It does not cause difficulties and it leads to Nibbana. So similarly, any kinds of right thoughts will not cause affliction to oneself or affliction to others or to both. So any kinds of right thoughts is wisdom. In other words, we can say that right thoughts becomes a supportive condition to the development of wisdoms. So any kinds of right thoughts does not cause difficulties and leads to the attainment of Nibbana, enlightenment. So meditators are not only striving to purify the thoughts during retreats, they also must put forth effort to purify the mind from all kinds of wrong thoughts or unwholesome thoughts. The Buddha also explained that as a bodhisattva at that time, if I think and ponder upon these thoughts For example, these thoughts of non-ill will, even for a night, or even for a day, or even for a night and day, I see nothing to fear from it. So, if one frequently thinks and ponders upon thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of loving kindness, then one would abandon the thoughts of ill will to cultivate the thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of loving kindness. And then one's mind inclines towards thoughts of non-ill will, thoughts of loving kindness. So sometimes some meditators say that they do not have the feeling of loving kindness, or the thoughts of loving kindness is quite weak or quite plain. It doesn't mean that they cannot practice loving kindness meditation. If such meditators are willing to put forth effort to cultivate the thoughts of loving kindness by wishing any object of loving kindness again and again, then the thoughts of loving kindness will be growing eventually. So, based on this discourse, if meditators always incline the mind to be mindful, eventually mindfulness becomes the habit of the mind. So meditation can be practiced all the time and at any places. As long as you are awake, then you can undertake this practice of bhavana or mental training. In other words, as long as you have mind, then you can meditate in order to cultivate the wholesome states. In accordance with the teachings of the Noble Eightfold Path, the second factor of the path is right thoughts. So it's because of right thoughts. The right thoughts leads to right speech. Similarly, when there's wrong thoughts leads to wrong speech, and so on. So when you make effort to cultivate thoughts of loving kindness again and again, then that thoughts of loving kindness will be manifested in your speech and bodily actions. So in other words, that practice of loving kindness in thoughts, known as metta manokam or metta manokama. So if there's a metta manokama, definitely one is able to translate it to metta vachikama and metta kayakama, metta in speech and metta in body actions. So when one can perform these three kinds of metta again and again, then it becomes one's habit. Then when the habit is well developed, that becomes a character of a person. So there's a saying in English, I quote, sow a thought and you reap a deed. Sow a deed and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. For character is destiny. In those, everyone can put forth effort to shape one's character. Shaping means that molding a character. For example, the parents put forth effort to educate their children, helping them to shape or to mold their characters. Similarly, everyone also can put forth mental effort in order to shape one's characters. So this shaping of characters, molding one's characters or a character of person begins from the mind or from the thoughts. So that's why you can see that the importance of mental cultivations. So that's why it's important to let the mind dwell on positive thinking. If the mind is always dwells on negative thoughts, then eventually one also becomes a pessimist. Similarly, during the practice of meditation, for example, mindfulness meditations, you should always make effort in order to make progress. If the meditators always think that they could not practice, for example, mindfulness meditation well, or loving kindness meditation well, then definitely the meditators will not able to put forth effort in the practice. Since the mind always thinks that one cannot achieve the goal, definitely one will not put forth effort into the practice. So meditators should look at what they are able to practice at this moment, then make an aspiration that tomorrow I shall be able to do it better than today. If meditators always feel disappointment or frustrations because of certain failures in their practice, the mind always dwells on these thoughts of failures, then they become very pessimist. They will not be able to arouse the effort to make progress. So the gist of this discourse is that whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of one's own mind. So I wish all meditators always incline their mind towards wholesome states, and eventually that becomes the inclination of your mind till the attainment of enlightenment.
สาธุ สาธุ สาธุ